Let's talk about weeds. If there's one thing that just dominates discussions, it seems, as soon as we start down this whole grazing program, it's about weeds. What do we do about weeds? The thing to remember about weeds is that their energy cycle is slower than forage. Any weed, if it gets defoliated, it will come back slower than forages, grasses, herbs, clovers, all those. I'm using a blanket term for the grasses, the forages, okay? Grass, clover, all that. They all recuperate faster. So in a prescribed strategic defoliation program, which is part of what this whole pruning thing is, right? It's going to naturally move us away from weeds toward better things. Remember, Andre Voisin found that with this kind of control, what he called rational grazing, where you're rationing it out, it reduces the weeds and increases the clovers. That's a good thing. So in general, my saying is change the management, change the vegetation. The weeds are simply a manifestation of the management that's been going on. You want to see what kind of management's been going on? Look at the weeds. Now, that being said, are the weeds edible? Most of the weeds are edible, or at least if they're not edible all the time, there's a strategic moment in time in their life cycle that they are edible. I mean, let's take broom sedge, for example. Broom sedge indicates often poverty ground. It's a hot season ground cover. Unsightly, certainly in the fall. Everybody hates broom sedge, partly because it is a poverty ground indicator. But in the middle of in the hot summer in late July, it's the most succulent thing out there. So typically what happens for us is we go onto a place, somebody wants us to come and lease their place, and they've never seen broom sedge until we come, and suddenly there's broom sedge all over. Well, why? Well, it's because under continuous grazing, in the middle of the summer, when that little tender broom sedge started growing, the cows ate it down. Because we're moving and letting things express and get longer, we didn't graze the broom sedge right when it was tender and succulent, and so it grew up, and now suddenly it's there. It's always been there. It just never was allowed to mature under the previous regimen. So those kind of things happen. In general, our belief is that if a cow will eat it, we're not concerned about it, because if she will eat it over time, that weed will not compete with the grasses and the clovers. Remember too that palatability increases with mobbing. When you mob up the herd and you increase the density, we've talked about this. It's like the new recruits at Camp Lejeune, right? And they're coming in and they're not carrying what's in front of them. They're just ingesting it as fast as they can. And so when we confine the animals to a little place, they don't become little picky buffet pickers. They realize, I've only got an hour of prime grazing. I'd better hog it in right now. And so they become less discriminatory in the way they choose the vegetation to eat. All that being said, I get that especially things like multiflora rose, autumn olive, things like that, you might have to go to mechanical control because cows won't actually kill them or eat them into oblivion. We never use an herbicide here. Let's just get that off the top. There's no justification for an herbicide whatsoever. So how are ways to deal with it? Mechanical control would include mowing. So again, you don't have weeds in your yard, and I certainly don't consider clover a weed. A lot of people, lawn care professionals consider clover a weed, and I just think that's almost sacrilege. How can anybody complain about clover? So think about your lawn that gets mowed all the time. You're not going to have a bunch of noxious weeds in there. One of my favorite tools is this right here. It's a mattock, and I love these things. you can dig out some pretty serious things with a mattock. And you know, even a pretty big infestation of something like multiflora rose. Think about this. If you just carry this with you, and I carry this in my farm machines, and it's always there, so I'm there, and I'm got 10 minutes. You can cut out some multiflora rose, a couple cedar trees, things like that, and if you just stay with it, and you whack out 10, 15, 20 a day for 15 minutes, well, it adds up. You don't have to walk or run around with a bunch of herbicide on the back of a and spread herbicide everywhere. Just go at it. Another thing is a weed whacker. All right. One of the things that happens when you start running all this fence is you give way more places for birds to land, and so a lot of times your weed pressure or your invasive pressure, like things like autumn olive or multiflora rose, those will start coming up under your single electric fence line. Okay, because that's where the birds sit. They go, they eat the seeds. They come, they sit on the wire, and they poop, and then you get things along your posts and your weeds. Well, there again, a mattock strategically placed there in the fence line. You got a few minutes. You can take out a bunch. A weed whacker, keep them weed whacked, and then if you have a really bad situation, a chainsaw. There's nothing, there's no sapling, there's no size. I can take down anything that's in my way, and I can work on mechanical control, including a big autumn olive that's gotten in the way or whatever. Main control is high density, short duration grazing. That's the main control because of the energy cycle. And then don't get too bent out of shape. Realize whatever you've got didn't get there overnight. It won't get out overnight. And it's maybe a 5, 6, 10 year, 40-year process. That's okay. If a cow will eat it, it's good nutritionally for her. Let her make that decision. And then with mechanical control, you can mow, you can mattock, you can weed whack, you can chainsaw. And between the combination of good controlled grazing and not being too, we're not in the golf course business. It's okay to have some, variety. They say that the original prairie had something like 100 species of plants per acre. I wonder how many of those would have been considered weeds, and people would have wanted to put, herbicide on them. But instead, the bison ate them, and they all made this glorious, diversified landscape that the bison and elk and everything enjoyed. So enjoy it for your animals as well, and don't fight it. Work with it. Intervene as necessary, when stuff gets out of control, but realize that the controlled grazing is going to be your number one way to deal with those invasive weeds.